This morning, though, in the brief time we have, I want us to think together concerning world religions and what makes Jesus so unique. I was speaking at the University of Vienna in Austria, and a graduate student raised his hand. He said, "Dr. Carlson," he said, "let me ask you a question." He said, "Why are you Christians always sending missionaries overseas?" He said, "Why don't you just leave people alone?" He said, "They're happy. They have their own society, their own culture, their own religion." He said, "Tell me, what is so unique about Jesus Christ, different from any religion, that you send missionaries overseas?" You know, that's a good question to ask ourselves this morning. I know that Calvary Chapel believes in Christian missions. But have you ever stopped to ask yourselves the question, you know, what is so unique about Jesus Christ, different from any religion, that you do that? In 1980, I was working on the Cambodian border in Thailand. At the time, we had some 300,000 refugees caught in a no man's land. As you may remember, after the Vietnam War, we had what came to be known as the killing fields of Cambodia. The Khmer Rouge, the Pol Pot regime, murdered nearly 2.5 million of their own people. In 1979, the Vietnamese invaded Cambodia, and when the Vietnamese invaded, the Cambodians fled into Thailand, but the Thais did not want them in their country. And so 300,000 refugees were caught on the border. I spent a year working in those refugee camps, and I wish I could take all of you with me to see something very interesting. Because here in this Buddhist country of Thailand, with Buddhist refugees coming from Cambodia and Laos, I soon began to realize that there were no Buddhists in those refugee camps taking care of their Buddhist brothers. And there were no Hindus in those camps taking care of the people. There were no Muslims there taking care of the refugees. Certainly the communists were not. They were shelling us every day across the border. And if you could have been with me, you would have seen something very interesting. That the only people there taking care of those 300,000 refugees, you know who they were? They're all Christians. And Christian mission organizations, Christian relief organizations like World Vision and Food for the Hungry and Christian World Relief and the Red Cross and on and on. I asked the man in charge of all the relief work in Thailand, I said, "Sir, explain something to me." I said, "Why? Why in a Buddhist country with Buddhist refugees are there no Buddhists here taking care of their Buddhist brothers?" I'll never forget, the man looked at me and he said, "Ron," he said, "have you ever seen what Buddhism does to a nation or a people?" He said, "Buddha taught that each man is to be an island unto himself. Buddha said that if someone is suffering, that is their karma. And you're not to interfere with another person's karma because they are purging themselves through suffering and reincarnation. Buddha said, you are to be an island unto yourself." He said, "Ron, the only people that have a reason to be here today taking care of these refugees are Christians who understand the value of human life. That these people are so valuable, created in the very image of God. So valuable that Jesus Christ died for each and every one of them." He said, "You know, you find that value for human life in no other religion, in no other philosophy but in Jesus Christ." Dr. A.W. Tozer, in his classic work, The Knowledge of the Holy, makes this statement in the introduction. He says that the history of mankind will positively demonstrate that no society or people has ever risen above its religion. And he says man's history will show that no religion is ever greater than its concept of God. What Dr. Tozer was saying was this: that what a person thinks about God, what your concept is this morning, folks, of God, will directly determine how you live in regards to your value of human individuals, your basis of morality, even your standard of living. And if I could take you with me around the world this morning, we could quickly discover what a person's religion and concept of God produces in everyday life and what is so unique about Jesus Christ. If I could take you with me, for example, to that great subcontinent of Asia, the country of India. Do you know in India this morning, think about this, folks, do you know there are more people in India than in all of Africa, South America, and Australia combined? Do you know those three continents put together do not have as many people as the nation of India? Over 1,000 million people in India this morning. Now in India, the basic religion is known as what? Hinduism. And in Hinduism, the basic concept of God is what is known as monism or pantheism. Now, in Hinduism, they teach that everything in the universe is God. They say that the stars are God, the clouds are God, the trees are God, the dirt is God, you're God, I'm God. Everything is God, and God, by definition, is impersonal. Now, I want you to think with me this morning. I know it's early, but Dr. Tozer says what a person thinks about God will determine how they live. If everything is God and God is impersonal, if the dirt is God and you are God, what do you become equal with? One of the problems in India, folks, has always been this: that Hinduism has never been able to raise the level of nature to the level of men and women. But it always ends up devaluing men and women to the level of nature. During the war with Bangladesh, refugees were flooding into Kathmandu, Nepal. Nepal, which is the only official Hindu country in the world. And they asked the foreign minister of Nepal, they said, "Sir, why are you not caring for these refugees?" His reply, which was recorded in the United Nations Journal, was simply this. He said, quote, he said, "What reason on earth do we have to care for these people? What reason on earth if they're all equal with dirt?" The United Nations reported that last year India grew enough grain to feed its entire population and export. But the United Nations also reported that last year nearly 1/3 of India's grain crop was eaten by rats. In fact, you may have seen the Discovery Channel last fall had a special on the rats of India, in which they now estimate that there are 3 times more rats in India than the population, nearly 3 billion rats, not mice, rats, which last year consumed nearly 1/3 of their grain crop. But as they pointed out, because of their religion and their concept of God, they will not kill the rats because it may be somebody's reincarnated uncle or aunt. And so the children starve to death on the streets. You see, friends, as you go around the world, you quickly discover that most of the world's problems today are not simply economic or technological, but they in fact are basic spiritual problems based upon what a person believes about God. The ultimate goal in India is to achieve a spiritual transcendence, where one finally osmosis and merges into this impersonal universe they call God. I was speaking in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, and you can go just north of the capital of Malaysia to the famous Batu Caves. And I watched there as the Hindus would go into their meditative trance. And then the Hindus would take these sharp skewers, they're like sharp knitting needles about 12 inches long. And I watched as they would first take their tongues, and they'd pull out their tongue as far as they could, and then they would jab the knitting needle down through the middle of their tongue so they could not pull it back in their mouth. I then watched as they took another sharp skewer and they'll jab it through their jaw and they'll pull it out the other side. And then I watched as they took long metal poles 6 to 8 feet long with big fishing hooks on the end, and they'll dig these into their flesh on the front and on the back of their bodies. And as the weight of these metal poles tear their flesh, the Hindus are required to run 272 steps up to the Batu Caves, where they will go in and they bow down and worship the idol of the python, the serpent, the snake, seeking to gain penance and forgiveness so that somehow they might become part of this impersonal universe which they call God.